Hello, I'm Irina Baker. Welcome to the podcast I Am a Woman of Power, inspiring stories and practical tips on overcoming challenges by going within and connecting with your divine power. In addition, every interview has a complimentary companion podcast practice at radiantmastery.com/practice. To hear more inspiring stories and practical tips on overcoming your challenges by going within and connecting with your divine power, make sure to subscribe to this channel. I'm here with Diana Gogan. Diana Gogan is a spiritual life coach and wayfinder. I love this word, wayfinder, helping people live a life that's a reflection of their soul. Diana powerfully weaves together coaching, energy work, shamanic, nature practices, and equine assisted coaching to create life-changing opportunities for her client. And I can attest to that too. I've been a client of Diana many times, and I even brought my clients to Diana because we had a wonderful, amazing experiences coaching with horses, and it was absolutely magical experience. And like Diana herself is a magical experience. So here we are. Hi, Diana. So very welcome here.
Oh, hi, Irina. It's beautiful to be here. Always fun to be with you.
Thank you. And I know today is a little bit of technical difficulty because Zoom is overwhelmed, I'm sure, because of the situation, what's happening in the country. And kids, actually, we're recording this interview on the day when kids are returning back to school, but it's a virtual school. So bear with us if there is some technical challenge, that will be okay. We can go through it with no problem.
Absolutely.
All right, so the first question I want to ask you, Diana. So let's talk about the challenging situation that you had a dilemma maybe, or you had a choice to make, or whatever it was that you want to talk to today about.
Well, the particular story that comes to mind, when we were talking about this was, it was a really pivotal moment in my life. I was working in corporate. I had a fantastic job. My career path was pretty much set, and it was moving upwards. It was also a very high stress job, and I found myself at one point crying in the parking lot every day before going into work. And at first it just, was a few tears, and then I would muster up the strength and go into work. And then it just, each day it seemed to progress. And it really eventually turned into that, the big ugly cry. So much so that I would actually park as far out in the parking lot away from anybody as I possibly could, because I didn't want peers, seeing that. And it also gave me some time, some distance to walk into the building and pull myself together. And it was one of those jobs where it was supplying everything that I needed. I had the title, I had the vacation, I had the benefits. It was great money. In fact, at that time, I believe I was making more money than my husband. So it was all really good, except for the content or the context that I was living in at that time. And I, within myself, thought I was, holding it together, putting on the face that everybody needed to see. And
I want to dig a little bit more into the story before we get to the happy ending. So, and I actually want to share that I feel like I identify with each of my guests in some way, because obviously we attract like we attract each other. And I could attest to what you were saying, because one time when I got a job that was the only job in my life that I hated so much, that was the only, before that, and of course after in my business, I always felt blessed that I have great jobs. I really loved what I was doing, but that particular job was a nightmare. So I remember I was driving a car, and the next minute I left the house, and I'm supposed to turn right to go to work. And suddenly, after some moment, apparently, of unawareness, I found myself standing on a big intersection that turned left. My car, and I said to myself, oh my gosh, my car turned by itself to the left and went the opposite direction from work because I did not want to be there. So it is a very, very nasty feeling, actually, right? When you have to spend so many hours during the daytime and then you absolutely hate it. What is it that you didn't like about your job? What was that made you so miserable?
Oh, you know, there were a lot of things, and I think the thing of it was a very male dominated department that I was in. And you know, this was early 2000s, and companies weren't so invested in looking at different ways to create more of an equal workspace. I had a very domineering, overbearing, not my immediate supervisor, but the boss above her. I also had, it was a very high stress job. I was responsible for over 300 branches, their hardware and their software, making sure everything functioned for interaction with. So I was one of those things where I was on call 24/7. So there was always that page. I mean, we didn't have cell phones so much back then. We got paged back then, but there was always that page that would come when you're sitting down to dinner or when you're, you know, out with friends or family, or you're, you know, so I was always on edge, just waiting for that pager to go off, which meant that I had to drop everything and go resolve whatever the issue was. There was a very high stress, very, okay, so here we go. So all those feelings are coming back.
Good.
That were
Let's have
there, and
those
we
feelings.
know
It's
that's
okay.
part of that healing process. I just felt like I was completely getting lost within the demands and the structure, that I was completely getting lost, that there was not that space for my soul to breathe. There was not that freedom of my self-expression, and in a lot of ways it was not encouraged, and it was actually, you know, you were meant to conform rather than bring yourself wholly into that space. And I was in that space where I was losing myself, and it was becoming, you know, really hard to breathe, not only, you know, in the physical responses that our body has when we go through those sorts of experiences, but also in what I would call today a very spiritual sense, where there was not that space to be and to grow and to show up as your whole self.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was a space where, and I realize now in looking back, it was solely my decision to do all of this, but it was a time where I was choosing to show up in fragments. You know, this is the work person. This is what I felt was expected at work. So this is the fragment that would show up there. This is the fragment that would show up in my relationship with my husband. This is the fragment that would show up, you know, with my family, and so forth. And so nowhere in my life really did I feel like I had that space where I could pull all of those things together and be whole.
So we will talk first about physical steps that you were trying to make, because obviously something held you there at the job, and I do want to address that because I know what it is and you know what it is, so we will discuss that, or we can start with that too. So what was it that held you on that job? And then I would like to ask you, what before you went deep inside maybe and somehow changed, because obviously you did break through from that slavery, and let me call it how it is, it's slavery, right? Because
Right.
definition of a slave, you have to work somewhere on the owner, and you don't want it because you're not free.
Mm-hmm.
And you were working and everything you said was great, but you did not feel free, right? Am I correct?
That's exactly it. Yes.
And I think it's more that slavery feeling of slavery that made you miserable, not as the job itself, because I know you're hardworking, I know you can work and it won't be any problem, but there was something much deeper than that, right? Than just the work.
Yes, yes. And, that slavery is really an interesting word. Of course, there's a lot of emotion and triggers around that word, but, the very core of it, I think, I appreciate you saying that, because I think that's exactly a good descriptor.
I am glad you agree, because I'm really bold and I say things as you know, but we need to operate with strong words, because if we beat around the bush, we will never get to the core of the issue, and then we will never heal. So if you don't get and don't look at the ugly monster inside, that actually is not real, but it's real at that time. So, and it was real at that time for you. So yes, you were a slave at that time. And we're looking at how you got out of there. Okay, so what was the main emotion, before we go to physical steps? What was the main emotion that kept you there? As a slave, what was the main feeling? What was it that held you there? How long have you stayed in this position of misery?
Oh, honestly, when I look back, it was a much longer time than the time frame we're speaking here, and I'm realizing how long it had begun, and I can actually pinpoint the moment that it started, and I was in that space from 97 to about 2003, 2000. It was, I think, 2003. So that's what, 6 years.
6 years.
It wasn't at that intensity, obviously.
Right, but
Line
it was escalating. It was going up.
Yeah, and the emotion was fear.
That's right. I didn't want to mention it. I wanted you to say the word.
It's obvious, right? It was hanging out right here in front of us, just waiting to be said. But yes.
That's right. That's right. And it was a huge fear, because, and please explain, what kind of fear was it? I am sure a lot of people are in this position, a lot of women in this position, and they are very, very familiar with it. So you're not alone. Just for any consolation.
I know that, and that is why stories like this are so important for all of us to heal through this.
Right.
It was a multifaceted fear. So there was a fear of not being able to support myself financially. There was a fear that has been a lifetime healing opportunity for me. There was a fear of not being perfect, of not living up to others' expectations. There was a fear of failure in so many different ways. There was a fear of not being seen worthy if things happened. If that makes sense,
it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, there was a fear of being homeless. I mean, that's that's a, when you look at the financial stuff, there was and I think to a lesser degree that at that time there was the anxiety as an offshoot of that fear that created chaos. So there were moments where I wasn't clear. I couldn't find that answer. I was so wrapped up in the energy and the emotion of what was happening within my space that there was no clarity.
What would you say if you were to make a decision? What was the main fear out of all? Which one would you pick that was the biggest one, that literally held you there? Because other fears we could somehow work with, or mask, or hide, or ignore, but there is one biggest kingpin, I call it, the major one, who or that will be the one that held you there. You mentioned it already, actually.
Yeah, and so it's interesting is I'm knowing what that is, but my override is saying, oh, it was a financial concern, and no, that was not it. It was a fear of looking irresponsible and not living up, meeting other people's expectations.
How did it hold you back? What did it make to you?
Um, it it held me back because I was seeking approval. I was seeking acceptance. I was finding places to find my worth externally, to get that outward confirmation rather than that happening within myself.
This is amazing that we got to this point, because you mentioned your worth, that you had to prove your worth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm taking the word worth and I'm replacing it with the word value, because it's the same. They're synonyms to me, in my opinion. But the value, if it's a stronger word that equals to the slave part.
True.
And because when we are in a professional world, they say, I remember one of my marketing mentors teaching me, or teaching us, about, you get compensated according to your value. What you offer to the market, you get compensated by that. And I don't believe in it, because I have plenty of examples that it's not true. Why? Because, for example, my mom has been a medical doctor all her life. She's retired, but she was a medical doctor all her life, and she was very well respected, very well positioned, very well loved. But it was in Russia, and doctors in Russia did not make any money whatsoever. So here, a doctor is God who makes a lot of money and gets compensated for the value. Well, what's the difference between a doctor here and doctor there? It's a doctor, right? And supposedly high value, but it wasn't the case. So that's just one example of how we perceive value and what happens with the value, right? So to me, you get compensated for what value you have assigned to yourself. Does that resonate?
Mm-hmm.
And we as women come to earth usually already pre-wired with not believing in our value.
Right.
So that makes sense to you?
Mm-hmm. That does.
It does? Okay, so what physical steps, if any, did you have any steps to take to remedy or to help yourself somehow? Not yet leaving completely, but is there anything else you did to maybe position yourself better or to cope somehow? What was there, or you just suffered through and continued through the motions?
I think one of the things that stands out about that time is something that we all tend to do. Well, if I just work harder, and this goes back to that value that we've been talking about, right? If I just work harder, I will prove my value. They will see my value. And when you're already, working to the limit, and you still push beyond that, it energetically, it is a huge drain on you, and it's a huge sacrifice of self to do that. And so I would say probably that was the number one thing I was doing. Yet at that same time, I was also, like I mentioned earlier, I was also beginning to question, what is my spirituality? Who am I? There was something inside of me that was so opposite of this world I was living in, and it was something that felt like it was awakening in me. So I began, exploring those things, doing some meditation. And of course that was a struggle, because my mind was on overload. And so that was also became a source of frustration. Why can't I do this? Why can't I find that space of quiet and peace, to get this? So there were some things that I was doing to try to also work through that. The outdoors for me is always a great place to heal and relax. But I would find that even when I would do that, waiting for the next shoe to drop. You know,
Mm-hmm.
what's going to happen? What's going to pull me back? What's going to cut this short? Can I truly enjoy this space? Or perhaps the better way to say that, at that point, I felt like I could not truly enjoy that space because I knew I was either heading back into my reality, or that reality would come in and interrupt what was going on, and I would be forced back.
I did an interview with somebody else. She is a former high-powered executive, and she described, I think, the same situation because she was pushing herself at work, thinking that she just needs to push through and be stressed and overwhelmed because that's what shows the value. If you did you at that time, did you also have that feeling? You said you had to give full of yourself, you to the job, you had to be all over, all there. She believed that she needed to be stressed, she needed to be pushing, and that shows how you work. This is what people will approve because you are so stressed, and people see that and they will approve. Is that
Oh,
same with you?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it was a badge of honor, so to speak. You
Mm-hmm.
know, the more projects you had going on, the more responsibility you had, the more interruptions and emergencies in your day that you had. You know, that was a badge of honor.
The more value you provided, right?
Right, right.
Right.
And it contributes to that thinking of, well, this company cannot survive without me. Look at all of this that I'm, this, look at the value I provide.
Mm-hmm. Was your health affected in any case, or you didn't get to that point?
Yes, it was getting there. I was not exercising as much as I was. I was not sleeping near it. I was, yes,
Mm-hmm.
I would go to bed at night, but it wasn't a restful
Right.
sleep, if you will. And then because of the stress, you're eating food that is not supportive of yourself, or you're eating it, you're just grabbing things on the go, you're whatever's convenient, or you're comfort eating at
Mm-hmm.
that time. So prior to that, I was vegetarian, bordering vegan, very healthy, exercised an awful lot, very fit. But those things started to slack a little bit, and I was gaining a little weight, and there was some other potential health issues that were starting to creep up. And no matter how much I fought those things, they just continued to get worse because they were not the problem.
Mm-hmm. Was there a point of no return?
There were probably several, but it did come down to that one point, and that was coming home one day. And, in my usual frazzled frame of mind, only half present to what was going on. But what caught my attention is when I got home that day, my husband says, "We need to talk." And I could tell from the tone of his voice, it wasn't talking about, doing the laundry. It
Right.
was something much more important. And so he grabbed my attention, and that I remember becoming very focused, maybe even almost hyper focused, because that was, when you're stressed and something grabs your attention, that's what you tend to do. And we sat down, and completely caught me off guard. He says, "I can't do this anymore." And I'm like, "What?" I'm not understanding. "What do you mean you can't do this anymore?" And he says, "I am constantly walking on eggshells." He says, "You are so stressed and you are so scattered that I never know if you're having a good moment and you are the person I know and fell in love with, or whether you are having a bad moment and a complete stranger to me." And at first I felt that anger come up. And interesting, as I'm sharing this, I'm thinking the value is coming back into that, because that anger arose because it's like, don't you see what I am doing here for us? Don't you see how important it is that I self-sacrifice myself? And of course, this is completely irrational, years later, but at that moment, there was that anger that came up, and those thoughts. And I heard that coming out of my mouth, and thank goodness that part of me that was starting to reawaken within was like, whoa, who are you? So as I heard those words coming out, I recognized that those words were not who I was. I'm a very loving, I'm a very compassionate, I'm a very nurturing, person. And those words were so not me. They were like that. I'm thinking of a Disney character, like the Wicked Witch. It was that sort of thing. So we had that discussion, and he's like, we need to make a decision. It's either us and we figure this out, or it's your career. And that left me speechless, because that was the one shiny spot in my life. That was the place where I could go home and step back into a completely different world. I had no idea the impact that I was having on that space. But that was the pivotal moment. That was the moment that made me catch my breath and go, oh, I need to really step back and look at this. Who have I become? What have I created? And what does that part that's awakening within me, what does that have to do with all of this?
Diana, I know you are a we know that you're a spiritual life coach. So let's mention this spiritual point. Yes, your husband said it to you because somebody had to, I guess, pronounce it to you, but to me, he represents a part of you.
Mm-hmm.
So do you believe that it was your awakening to yourself, to the problem that you needed to look at?
Yes.
Even though you were not sort of aware yet, but it was the first moment of awareness of some sort. Can you comment on that?
Absolutely. I firmly, I completely believe that. It's like, he had that ability to hold the mirror up for me to see that part of myself.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was not seeing that. I was looking outside as all of these things were affecting and influencing, completely detached from my role and my responsibility within that. Mm-hmm. Until that moment where, like I said, he just held that space and was able to hold that mirror up without, needing to be the bad guy and show me that part of myself, what I had created.
And I know you are pretty deep, and that's why I could go deeper with you, I guess.
We're digging.
We're digging. What exactly the part we were looking at? We defined it as a slave already, right? That part, that's a self, right? So we have many, many selves inside. And that was the situation. You were looking at some particular self, a part of yourself. Mm-hmm. What was it? A slave, the person who believed that she had no value, right? That's why she had to prove herself over and over. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else to that description? What did you get to the point of knowing what that self was?
Yes, actually. And wow, I so appreciate that question, because it was that little girl inside of me. It was that 8-year-old who wanted nothing more than to know that she was loved and that she was valued, and that no matter what she did, she could not lose that.
Would you say that little girl was the one who got this job and was proving herself to earn that love?
Yes.
Because something made you stay at the job, something made you being or thinking or considering the money part, that what you're doing here, something made you create all this monster that does, and become enslaved by this
Mhm.
part. So
Yes,
what was that seeking? What was she seeking?
it's those themes we've been talking about. She was seeking that approval. She was proving that she had what it takes, that she was following the rules. And because of all of these things, that she would be valued.
That's right. And the value in the physical world, in the matrix, right?
Mhm.
Outside matrix is what? The value is the money that you receive, the salary, the recognition that you're supposed to receive for your hard work,
Mhm.
and all the attributes of that outwardly temporal false power, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I think there are many many shiny objects, if you will, that we seek to gather to prove, if I've gathered all of these shiny objects here, see, this is my value.
Right. This is brilliant because you are an example of people are looking for value in all the wrong places. And that was definitely a wrong place for you, right?
Yes.
The girl, 8 year old, did not find it in the right place. She was not looking at the right place. She was looking for love in the physical world, in the world of business, in the world of corporate.
Mm-hmm.
And all she found was stress, slavery. What else? What else did she find there?
Stress. So stress, slavery. Um, she found, and I love this part of this process, because now my mind is just like completely gone blank, which to me represents that we're in the right place, and we're doing the work in the right place, and refocusing, creating the healing path out of that, if you will. So I have totally lost it.
Well, that's good because she's looking at it right now, the 8 year old. She's
She
looking at
is.
it and looking back. What she found was slavery, ill health, and no love. That's the main thing. She didn't find any love. She didn't find any approval that she really seek. All of this was
Yeah.
false. All of this was not, because the same, if you leave the job immediately, everything stops. You don't have that temporal power anymore, right? Because the power comes with the status, with the position, with the money you earn, with benefits or favors that you can provide for other people who will cherish you for that, or who will praise you for that, or who will want to be your friends. And when everything is gone, suddenly you are physical world things. Nobody, because you don't have that position anymore, you don't have that money anymore, and now who are you? And now
Yeah.
we're getting to the point of who am I? What will happen from what will happen to me? Because where is my power? Did you have any of it? Did you think any of it at that time?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. And another word that's coming up for me, which is really an interesting concept to explore, is self-sacrifice.
That's right.
I I was sacrificing, I was given one for the team, if you will, at my
That's
own cost. And when I gave the team up, there was nothing to sacrifice myself for, unless I chose to continue to be a victim and
and
say,
that,
woe is me, and look what's happened to me, and then that becomes a different aspect of self-sacrifice.
That's why you said you blocked or you lost it, you couldn't come up with words, because you needed moment to really accept it, I think. Because
Oh,
it's
yeah.
strong. It's you're really serious about it. You want to get it out. And It's strong, self-sacrifice. That's right.
Mhm.
Why did I need to sacrifice myself? For what? For the false temporal power, for the things that are not really that important. Yes, we do have to serve, but that's a different concept entirely,
Yes, yes,
right?
yeah.
So
Whew.
that was the awakening, right?
That was the awaken. That was yeah, that was the pivotal moment. And as we're, talking now, that I think the beauty of those pivotal moments is they continue, they ripple out. I mean, all of these years, 17 years later, I'm still learning, I'm still healing from that space, just at different levels and in different spaces within my life.
I think it's getting to the point of that's it. I'm done. I'm healed about it. So I feel that this is the final touch that needs to be put as like a dot above I, right? To make an I letter, the final
Woo,
moment.
yay.
If that resonates with you, of course.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And we've talked about this in our relationship outside of this interview, that those things we continue to create with them until we hit this point, right? Where it's
That's
like,
right.
all right, now I'm ready to heal, and what I create next will no longer be influenced by
Exactly.
this aspect.
Exactly. Exactly. So to summarize what you already said, it's okay to repeat if you want. What is it that you left behind when you left that corporate world? And by the way, how did it happen?
I gave my notice.
Did it
The
take you
next
some time to think, or you just went next day and did it
No, the next day,
the
because I
next
had
day?
those questions. We had that really frank conversation. What happens? We lose the benefits, we lose the income, we, there's, I'll have my retirement to take with me, but, it's going to kind of stop, so there's all of these things, that insurance, um, all of these different perks. It's like, I would go from having a great income to all of a sudden nothing. And I'm not sure, I knew I didn't want to go back into that same type of environment, just switch companies, if you will. I had enough self-awareness at that time to know that, and so did my husband, that we needed to do something different. And so we came up with that plan, and we came up with that segue. And my husband was like, put your notice in and be done by the end of the week. And that part of me that was still trying to be responsible throughout this whole thing says, no, I'll give a 4-week notice. Because I knew I had to train other people and, divvy out all of those things. And so when I put my notice in, they wanted 8 weeks.
Oh, wow.
And, there was that part of me that was like, oh, all right, as long as I know there's something at the end. But then what I was beginning to get back through this process was a greater sense of my own boundaries and what I am willing to sacrifice and what I am willing to not. And I knew 8 weeks was not it. So, I stuck with my 4. But yeah, there was a lot. And there was even that deep breath, when I left the office that day, of feeling like, 1,000,000 pounds had been lifted off my shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
But in some ways it felt like there was nothing solid under my feet. It was learning to not have that safety net.
That's right. That false sense of security that people think there is security in the world.
Right, which is, that false sense is actually the price you pay to move into slavery, like we've been talking about. Yeah.
Exactly. By the way, to get practical tips and awareness shifting activities pertaining to this interview, go to radiantmastery.com/practice to access your complimentary companion podcast practice. When you left with that cutting off the chain or umbilical cord or whatever it's called, right? Something that held you in slavery. I mean, I guess chain would be better word. And you went the opposite direction. What did you have to learn? What was required of you to be in a different, on the opposite side?
Oh, that's the interesting spot. Because it really became more about being self-reliant, about finding that value within myself. You know, I wasn't working towards a bonus or a raise or accolades from peers and managers and so forth. All of that had to come from within me. And for the first little while, I really struggled with that. And it was that opportunity to start to explore what made me happy, what energized me, how I could recognize the progress I was making, and I could recognize where my contributions, that may or may not be the right word to use there, but it was really, again, an opportunity to hold up that mirror and see different aspects of myself and the value that each of those held, and begin to bring those things back together.
Did you have a fear that you would not survive?
Absolutely, yes. I had many sleepless nights at the very beginning, that would be the case. What I was turning my attentions to were some, we had started doing some real estate investing. And so that's where I was focusing my attentions at that moment, was building that aspect up, which of course opened other doors down the road. But I knew I didn't have a paycheck in 2 weeks. I knew that there was nothing additional coming in, and now the burden had been shifted to my husband, for that, which he was absolutely fine with doing while we were in that space of figuring out, what was next. But there was guilt with that. There was shame with that. There was feeling like I had dropped the ball, that I was not holding up my end. And I actually found myself through that time attempting to overcompensate, in the way of mothering and nurturing and making sure he had everything he needed and stuff, until it came to the point one day where he's like, just stop. Just stop. Refocus those energies, refocus where you're putting that attention. I'm okay. So it's kind of interesting in looking back, and I'm loving this conversation because I haven't looked at it sometimes through these different aspects, but in trying to overcompensate and again prove my worth. Even though I wasn't bringing in money, I could be the most loving, gracious, generous, wife. I could meet your every need. I could anticipate your every need. So it was, again, taking those same habits that I had created and redirecting them into something else.
Mm-hmm.
Until he's
so you followed the same pattern, so to speak, right? It's just from outside world, it flipped into the internal home world, but it's still outside world. It's still looking for attention outside, looking for love and approval from outside. Now it's from the husband. Before it was from the job. So from that time, you said it's been 17 years. Did anything change?
In some ways, yes. I have, as I started my own business, and as those different opportunities and synchronicities begin to happen that have brought me to the point I am now, definitely I have found my value. I have found my worth, but in some ways that same answer is still no. And particularly when I feel under pressure or under stress, or, being self-employed, sometimes there's that dip in the income. When those things start to happen, I can catch myself in these, going back and digging up those old habits, that old way of thinking. And the interesting thing at this point is that, sometimes it happens and it happens under the radar, and it takes me a little while to recognize it's going on. But I am recognizing it. I do recognize it now. And it feels, the other thing that I sense with that is that it feels off. Something feels off within me, because I also have these other habits and these other ways of living and being that are whole and seeing my own value. So when the old stuff kind of creeps in, it creates tension, internal tension, if you will. And that's always that opportunity for me to say, all right, let's stop and take a look at it. Do I do that all the time? No, sometimes I'm still like, oh no, let's put your head down and work a little harder. And of course the tension builds until I have to look at it. But so yeah, some of that has carried forward, but some of it has also evolved.
How about that relationship with the spirituality or with the divine power? Did it come into the picture at some point?
Yes.
In what way?
There was another pivotal point where, I shifted and did real estate investing, and then got my real estate license and sold real estate for, 4 or 5 years. But then there was another pivot point when we moved from Utah to Arizona at the time, the crash in 2008. And I knew I didn't want to be in real estate anymore, where again, that safety, I was leaving my birthplace, the place I had lived for 40 years. I was leaving that safety net behind and moving to a place that I loved, but didn't know anybody and wasn't sure how to make a living in this space. The idea was, to open my healing business and open my coaching business, because at that time I had done the training and I had got the certifications and things of that nature. But in Utah, I had never fully stepped into it, because real estate was making, it was easier to do that. It was making a lot more money than to start up this new business. And so that transition at that point is the space where I would say I clearly started to lean into that. Where I clearly started listening and following those prompts, and of course continuing to develop that and learning and growing, and all of those things in my mind that I had dreamed that I wanted to do. I wanted to have that meditative space. I wanted to be in sync. I'm a nature girl, and I love to be in nature. I love to be just held by nature, but I also like to hear nature and to communicate and be reciprocal in that relationship. And so that was that time where I started doing all of those things and felt my own personal spirituality grow, which, absolutely overflowed into all aspects of who I was in that outer world as well.
So how is that 8-year-old doing right now?
That 8-year-old, is kind of on the precipice of yet another change that is happening in my world today as we speak. That is another big pivot point. She is holding her own. She is aware of the choices that she can make now, of doing things different than those old ways, the old habits, if you will.
Does she know that she doesn't need to seek love in the outside world?
Yes. And I love that you asked that question, because that's not even where she wants to look for it right now. I mean, she really, the best way to describe this is that she recognizes that this is her time to actually do those things, in different ways, and I'm not going to say bigger ways, but in different ways and in new ways that really, kind of like the tagline of my business that you shared, that really allow that expression of my soul to be where I lead from.
Right, right. So if I am to summarize the whole thing, and then I would like to ask a question before I forgot to ask that question, what you would recommend to others who are miserable at the job? But right now I want to summarize, if I can, tell me if it's true or not, but your journey sounds like you were looking for love and approval, and you were looking to find your own value in the outside world through whatever you were doing, through even, yes, first the corporate, and then even the husband later, the in the house being the perfect wife. So all of it was seeking approval and love outside, in the matrix, in the physical world. Finding that, looking for that solution to what was missing inside. And now, so basically the journey brought you to the point when you realized, no matter what I do, no matter where I am, the focus has to be inside, not outside. All the love, all the approval, everything that I have, I want, is already there. I just have to find it. But there is no answer in the outside physical world, in the matrix. Is that correct?
Oh, you summed it up beautifully there. Yes, absolutely.
So what is it that you would recommend to those women who are in, and maybe men as well, but women who are in your position when you were before? They are afraid of that they would lose money, they're miserable at the job, and yet they are really, really dying there, so to speak, inside.
Right.
What would be your recommendation?
There's a couple of things that really helped me through that time, and that have helped me since that, transition to where I am now. It's definitely been a journey. And one of those is being willing, and it may seem really vulnerable at first, but really be willing to look truthfully at what is going on, about what it is that you are doing. And some of that, I think, and I find this works a lot well for me and with a lot of my clients, is initially begin to be curious. Something's off. Something is sucking, your soul dry. Something is draining all of your energy. And when you're in that space, you're continually stuck in that loop. But what can help break that loop is start to ask those questions. What if? What might it look like? How might I? Where can I get, where can I find that support? Again, not looking for outside validation, but actually somebody like my husband who, as we talked about, was able to hold that mirror up and help me see myself. He didn't tell me who I was. He didn't tell me what needed to be fixed. He probably didn't have any idea.
Right. You didn't.
But he was able to hold that mirror up and just hold that space for me to see myself, to honestly see myself and break that down. And so I think for so many people, it is finding someone who they may not, like my husband, may not have any clue about how to help you other than just to hold that space and hold that mirror up. I've worked with coaches, I've worked with, I've done some counts, I've done a lot of things over the years to help me move through that and to help me see things differently in a way that I couldn't. And what I found through that too is that as you learn, you awaken that wisdom within yourself. That wisdom is there. But until you start to peel off and lift that load, you can't hear it or see it. And so there comes a point in time that as you begin that, you become more self-sufficient. You become your own guide. You become your own wisdom keeper. if you will, and learn how to do these things on your own. Do I need support? Absolutely. You know, and I think this interview is really beautiful of that. You know, you gave me some really beautiful support and guidance. You held up that mirror. And I know as coaches, you know, sometimes we see so clearly, we see what the client doesn't see, but the best journey is to discover that yourself and to have somebody who can hold that mirror up and help you do that.
That's
So,
right. And interestingly, you mentioned responsibility before, because you were saying that I took responsibility, or I wanted that responsibility at the corporate job. But actually, it's what I were talking about it right now, as I heard you, was to take responsibility for yourself. Because when somebody looks at the mirror, shows you the mirror, at that time, you could ignore your husband and you could choose a very different direction and say, no, I will do what I want to do. Or you actually had to look, at some point, you had to look at yourself and say, okay, this is the internal locus of control, as they say, internal focus, instead of going outside and taking responsibility somewhere else. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, yes. And I think that would be the other, you know, the other thing I would really recommend to people is to begin to take that responsibility. It's not easy sometimes. And you know this, you know, you do all of this yourself, but it's not often easy to even just admit
That's right.
that we created that and we were the catalyst for that. And to, you know, it's like eating crow sometimes. It tastes bitter for a moment, but afterwards there's clarity, there's freedom. You can now easily shift and move because you're not trying to hide all of that.
Right. As I was reading a book about juicing, actually, green juice fasting, I liked the phrase that I wanted to say as an example to what you had said. They said in a book that toxins hurt us twice, on the way in and on the way out. So I want to put this into what you just said with the issue, because whatever issue that we have inside and we need to look at and take responsibility for, it hurts us twice as well. On the way in, when we create that issue, then we hide it, and it is painful. As you said, it's not always nice, and it's not easy to look, because it will hurt us again, because we have to look at it and feel it and experience the pain again, but then it's on the way out, it will be gone.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what is important. I don't care if it hurts me right now, I want it to be gone. And that's been my motto all this time, 25 years on the spiritual path.
Yeah, that's a perfect analogy. Yeah, I really like that analogy.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. And now we got to the point. I have no idea what time it is. I have no idea how much time we spent. I want to catch you off guard and say, can you say, I am a woman of power?
I am a woman of power.
How does that feel right now?
That feels even better after our conversation than it would have before. And I believed it before.
That is so good. That is so good. And that's why we are doing this. That's why I'm doing these interviews, to help you and to help everybody else who will watch, because it's such a internal pain is the universal pain. Nobody is immune, and we wouldn't be here on earth if we didn't have it. So it's not only yours, it's everybody else's. Thank you so much for wonderful, well, first of all, being vulnerable and being willing to share, because it's out in the open and you're sharing something that not everybody would want to share. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that, Diana. Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you for creating the sacred space to do so. And, you know, I believe it is the more of us that step into this, we actually, give others the courage to do the same. And that's where the healing takes place. That's where we, I'm going to say we as women, again, will heal these old wounds so that we show up more powerfully in the world and become that woman of power.
That's right. That's right. Beautifully said. I am a woman of power, helping women to awaken to and connect with their inner divine power. Slow down and tune in, like Diana did 17 years ago. Remember to get practical tips and awareness shifting activities pertaining to this interview. Go to radiantmastery.com/practice to access your complimentary companion podcast practice. To hear more inspiring stories and practical tips on overcoming your challenges by going within and connecting with your divine power, make sure to subscribe to this channel.